Hello, this is Rita Liu, and you're watching The Shift Asia. The Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, or GEAPP, is a collective movement started by the IKEA Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Bezos Earth Fund to change energy for vulnerable communities in the region. Their work includes renewable energy transition work through battery energy storage systems, or BESS, and distributed renewable energy in 7 priority countries, among them India, Indonesia, and Vietnam. These priority countries represent 35% of people without access to electricity globally and 56% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world's low and middle income countries. I'm here with Kitty Boo, Vice President for Southeast Asia. Hi, Kitty. Nice to be speaking to you. Maybe we can start off with with GEAPP and its genesis.
Sure, we could talk about GEAPP. So, GEAPP, the full name is Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. What we do is actually included in the name that we have. We're a global organization. We work through an alliance. We care about people and planet, and we primarily work in the energy access and energy transition space. So GEAPP is a global coalition of around 2,000 partners working together around the world, and we focus on energy for good, and we focus on bringing together the philanthropy. For example, the Rockefeller Foundation, IKEA Foundation, Bezos Earth Fund. We focus on bringing governments, entrepreneurs, private sector, technology, policy, and financing partners together in ecosystem. The alliances play a catalytic role in combating climate change and energy poverty by supporting the emerging economies, primarily in Equatorial region and global south, in their shift to greener energy. We help prove world's model that ensures the universal energy access, and we focus on the economic prosperity of the region as well as green jobs. GEAPP is quite committed to the accelerating energy access. We are quite committed to accelerating energy access, also a people-positive energy transition in emerging markets to achieve the 3 objectives, which includes enable 150 million new jobs, sustainable livelihoods, reducing 4 gigatons of carbon emissions, and expanding energy access to 1 billion people.
Right. And I guess the end target or goal is just to uplift these communities.
Yes, absolutely right. We are deeply rooted in our community work. Oftentimes we ask ourselves, although we work for the Alliance Ball, who are the GS clients? And, it's without a doubt that our clients are the people in the community we work with. Oftentimes they're situated in climate vulnerable regions. They're often left behind. Most of the community members are women and children, and therefore uplifting the communities through giving them reliable, clean, and affordable energy is the key.
Right. And there's so many communities to work with, right? How do you decide where to work, right? And this whole concept of blended finance.
That's a really great question. I think where we decide to work is where the need is being heard and seen. So, unlike a for-profit organization where the primary goal is to be profit-driven, is to answer to investors' expectation of return on investment, our capital buyers are looking at the impact of the work, essentially building a very robust impact framework to understand when you do philanthropic dollars, when you do actually disbursement of philanthropic dollar by building the market-facing philanthropy, what are the impacts that you're doing by curating the partnerships often through alliance and by bringing people together. And then it goes back to what's in our name, is people on planet, and it's actually the 3 targets that I mentioned earlier. So when we're looking for communities, oftentimes it's people situated in left behind regions, people not getting the technology, not getting the favorable policy, not getting the support, not getting the attention, and oftentimes not getting their voice out, almost being left behind. But then at the same time, people in these remote places are oftentimes the hardest within climate change disasters and so on. So to your questions about blended finance. Now, blended finance in the region is not something that's brand new, but it has been around for a little while. But given the current situation and then the outcry for energy financing and climate finance to really go into the most impactful areas, blended finance emerged as a very powerful tool. And what it does is actually just allow different sources of capital with different expectations of return on investment to go to the right tranche, the right position to be in a capital stack in order to buy down oftentimes the costs of investment or to bend just the economic curve a little bit to enable deals to happen. So let me give you an example. In Indonesia, we're working, for example, with our partners in the remote islands of Indonesia. It's an archipelago country of 70,000 islands. And 4,000 of these 70,000 islands or communities will actually have no access to electricity or not having reliable access to electricity. Right. So the community is the kind of community that GEAPP strives to work with. And the way we're thinking about how to help them have the access to clean energy is by transitioning the communities out of diesel generation assets, by providing renewable energy paired with battery storage to fully give them the stability so they can then use the energy to be more productive to actually make a better livelihood. In that process, there are different ways of utilizing the different sort of partners and different capital sources to make sure that we structure deals and projects in a way that brings in all different sources of money from different partners in different blending structures. So then something that's not naturally a go-to for private sector, something that might be a little bit small in scale for example, developed partners would actually be structured in a way that's got potential for scaling and for our partners to participate.
Right. Okay. I was going to ask you how the BESS and DRE works, but I guess you could have explained that. But how do you work with local governments?
I think working local government partnerships absolutely a very important element of the work that we do. Local government oftentimes in ASEAN countries, they do already have the transition targets. For example, many of the governments in ASEAN region, the 11 countries, have their 2030 target, have their 2050 or 2060 decarbonization target. So these is absolutely that this signals commitment in the region for large transitioning, and that they signals the government really would like to make sure that this long-term vision becomes a reality. Another question is, how do we make sure that the political will that's signaled very strongly in the region, and also the big mega transition targets that's going to be, in the next 20 years or 10 years to come, actually become a reality? I think to be able to work along the government, we need to do three things right. Number one, coming from the fundamental needs of hosting country. So this is not a situation where what GEAPP knows or what GEAPP can bring. This is a situation where all of GEAPP alliance partners and GEAPP can go into a partnership with local government, fully understanding what is the pain point and what could really be enabling to the local government. What are the resources they need, and what could be really the unlock, the catalytic role that we can play by simply coming from a fundamental perspective of the hosting country, right? I think the second thing that we need to understand very well is truly understanding an ecosystem approach, which means what is already sitting with the government in terms of the capability, in terms of the body of work and research, what is being complemented in the market by our alliance partners, or people who simply are deep-rooted organizations that are doing all good work. And so we're working with the government, we don't end up repeating the work that's being done or causing sort of, even to a certain degree, a wastage of resources if there's something already picked out there. And I think the third thing is, because GEAPP works through a licensing model and we have people in different countries in the region, therefore the GEAPP model would be alliance with different partners and really enhancing the dialogue and the conversation and the communication with the local government. Therefore, it's trying to break an ecosystem together, trying to foster a more regular type of conversation, trying to make sure that the catalytic role as philanthropists could really ignite, for example, deals, projects, initiatives, and catalyze on GEAPP lines and beyond.
Right. I'm going to put these two questions together. I think like a lot of us are sitting in the comforts of our home, right? We're not aware of what's happening with farmers in off-grid communities with climate change and how this affects their livelihoods. Maybe you can explain a little bit more, and how I guess BESS and DRE come in to help these communities.
Yeah. So maybe we can kind of talk about the region a little bit. You've asked, there are 11 countries and they are of different sort of size of economy, different GDP per capita. So ASEAN is a very interesting place where we have lots of archipelago, lots of islands in this region. The economies, different challenges, transition targets. But the region is really highly exposed to, for example, climate risks, especially in a lot of the islands we have in this region. And we currently have no shortage of that. Right. The other thing is, ASEAN essentially is a carbon-taking ball in the sense that 60% of all of our grids are actually dominated by fossil fuel. So the successful transition of this region is of global significance, right? To really fully combat climate change. Now, given our particular lens is with remote communities, you won't understand remote communities unless you get close to them to really observe the life, to understand what's going on. So let me give you an example of how DRE, BESS, and also productive use of energy can really transform lives and equities. We talked about Indonesia earlier, and there are a few thousand islands in Indonesia where people don't have reliable access to energy. Therefore, I think the definite mind that our team thought about is really working with the city utility, the civil off-taker and distributor, which is PLN, to think about how to help remote islands to transition away from expensive and polluting technology like diesel generation assets by providing with the rooftop solar as well as battery storage so they had reliable, clean, and affordable energy. But through the teams kind of consistently traveling to the region, Maluku and North Maluku provinces, we have observed that most of these remote islanders are fishermen. So if you think of a family on the island, the men go out to fish in a diesel-powered boat during the day. When they bring the fish back, the women are in charge of preserving the fish, right? And we realize that the women are quite stressed out because we don't have fridge there, cold chain facility. And for you and me, ice is a very commonly, valued goods, right? You can go supermarket to buy it. You can make your own ice at home. But in a place like Maluku, for example, ice is absolutely in scarcity, right? Part of that is because the lack of electricity to make this ice. Therefore, women are oftentimes put in a position where they're stressed out about how to preserve the fish in a way that they're still fresh enough for market the next day, for example. So the team realized with the lifestyle of this community, I realized the wastage and what prevents them from getting better life. It's the fact that when you do not have cold chain, the local fishery families, sometimes in the harvesting season, ended up throwing about 50% away. Wow. Of their fish harvest. And also, they end up overfishing, right? They end up working more, making less. And it's a stressful kind of vicious cycle from families and communities. And it's certainly no good for the environment, right? And of the decarbonization journey and trying to kind of improve life balance. So when you also, on the other hand, build up the diesel generator, build up the solar averaging with battery storage, what sometimes happens also in the remote community is that people who are not born about this energy, they get used to the scarcity. So when suddenly the energy comes online, the life is going electrified. Okay, so what can they use this energy that's free and clean, but really help them with their livelihoods? So with that in mind, we sort of merged into our phase 2 of the program, which is really designing out how to solarize the ice making facility for a number of benefits for the community. Number one, what's been built of solar and battery storage will be put into practice, will be fully utilized. So that asset's being leveraged. Number two, people are creating new jobs. Okay. When you have less people delivering diesel on these islands, right? You're doing precise calculation in terms of understanding for every 100 kilowatt hour that we replace diesel with renewable energy, how many people are losing jobs? That in itself is an interesting calculation because what we're doing is a full value chain calculation. Imagine people who's doing the buying, the trading, the delivery. So for people who are participating in the full energy to be transitioned into, for example, jobs that have something to do with the ice makers, the debris of ice, the management of the cold chain, and also the solarized assets on rooftops and also the maintenance and so on and so forth. We're trying to transition the workers that used to be in that diesel value chain into a completely green new value chain. And that's the creation of green jobs. Right. And very much in the spirit of no one gets left behind. They're just the energy transition piece. Now, the third benefit, I think, for that is that, of course, you won't end up throwing fish away so much. Right. The fishlets. It's more productivity for the economy, for the household, for the income, and a little less pressure on family.
Sometimes we need these reminders of how lucky we are and how something as simple as electricity can just change the livelihoods of communities at large, right? And I'm sure you've just mentioned Indonesia and the islands, and that's fishing. The other areas would have different concerns, but yeah, climate change. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. How can the public at large support your work?
That's a great question. So I think we have primarily been working through an alliance model. And in our 2000s alliance partners in the region, we talked about private sector, we talked about government, we talked about developer partners, we talked about NDBs, DFIs. We talked about quite a few different types of alliance partners, but you are absolutely right that we haven't been able to alliance with just the general public, right? I think this is really, really important because what we're servicing is actually local communities. We say that as our client. So therefore, when we go there, our understanding is rooted in what we observe, what we hear, and what we can do from this position for the reward community members. But the society has so many more actors beyond what I've listed already. To really make a kind of radical changes we need, the fundamental changes we need, I think for the general public to understand and digest a very daunting theme of climate is very important. And I think, people like you and I both have, and which is what the Shift Asia is doing already, which is putting this kind of conversations, which is perceived as daunting, too big, very vague, maybe not imminent or what have you, however is perceived, really in the harm center of the general public, right? So people can digest this sort of touchable piece with bite-all sizes, right? With sizes that they can kind of take that each bite with each bite and then try to understand this bit by bit. I think that's one way to start with it. And I think the second thing that people can start kind of by thinking about is really thinking in terms of the societal change by shifting into a low carbon future. What are those sort of lifestyle changes that the general public can really do in order to kind of foster that low carbon transition? And I see this both from the perspective of getting kind of self-educated, being tied into the conversation, reading, watching kind of the different changes that's happening, but also making conscientious choices in the lifestyles we have. And that starts with, the green ways of transportation, the mobile, the prices that the choices that you make when it comes to consumption, in terms of everyday choices of, what kind of consumer products that you would like to get your hands on, as well as, if in some countries there is a choice between green electricity as well as different electricity providers, makes that kind of conscious choice would actually be very, very important as well.
Right. Kitty, is there anything that I have not asked that you'd like to bring up?
I think we talked quite a bit about, GEAPP and the alliance model and also the work that we do in Indonesia. I think what I really want to say is Asia is absolutely a very, very critical place for the world to make transition happen, to actually make sure we fight climate change. If Asia can make it, the world can make it. If Asia cannot make it, that's going to have absolutely devastating implications in the rest of the world. But in Asia, we have a very, very tough piece, right? Because we are going through a transition. And transition presents a lot of uncertainties. Because in the process of winding down of the fossil generation assets and in the process of wrapping up the renewable energy, in this region, we also have very robust economic prosperity.
Right.
We will double, and we are doubling the energy growth of the world on average. Therefore, it's really absolutely important for Asia to work together to think about regional integration, to think about what are the expertise, ecosystems, finance, technology that we can draw on and fully align all the ecosystem players and partners to the same table and to be able to push the agenda.
Right. Thank you for your time. Kitty Boo from GEAPP. Of course, you've been watching The Shift Asia.